Hi, and welcome to the Serverless Coffee Break. My name's James Bezic. I'm a developer advocate here at the AWS Serverless team. And today we'll be talking to Ribenzaft. He's the CTO and co-founder of Epsagon, but he's also an AWS partner and an AWS Hero and part of a community leader for AWS, giving lots of talks and events. And he's appeared on Twitch streams such as Happy Little APIs. And so he's really part of our big extended AWS Serverless family. So welcome, Ran. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Actually, it's my pleasure to being hosted, in such great shows, doing live coding. It's super fun, and I hope, people really like it. And yeah, same for serverless. That's my passion.
That's great. That's great. So I've got to ask you, how did you start Epsagon? What was the story behind that?
Actually, I got a pretty cool story before Epsagon. How do I get to know to the serverless ecosystem? It was, I think, like 2017 or even a bit earlier than that, where I bought my first Alexa Echo she's now spinning on, and I started to developing skills on top of Lambda functions. Back then, it was tightly integrated. I'm pretty sure that today it's even much more tightly integrated than what I had. But it was super fun. It was super simple, and very soon I got to hundreds of thousands of requests a day, which I didn't kind of handle personal project at this scale, and I didn't really need to handle anything. So it was immediately fell in love with that. And moving forward, me and my partner gathered up and we understood that, for a side project, it's okay to go with that. But if you're doing like a real scale project with hundreds or thousands of functions, with, millions of invocations, it's starting to get a bit messy, to gain observability, what's called today in the industry, or just monitoring or just logging becomes super complex. So that's what really kicked in the agenda for Epsagon.
Yeah. So what is the best way, if you're in a new project, what's the best way to approach bringing observability into an application?
Yeah, so, and I don't like really buzzwords, so I'll try to break down observability into the pillars of it. So it's composed with three things. First one is monitoring or metrics, actually. The second one is logging, and the third one is tracing, or actually distributed tracing. There are some tweaks nowadays to adapt to the modern kind of software. And, starting with metrics, this is pretty standard. This is pretty straightforward. You're gathering metrics like, how much memory my Lambda function consumed, and how much time it takes to call this API or that API, or the overall duration, or even the init duration of the Lambda functions. This gives you a good kind of overview what's going on. However, when there is a problem, metrics wouldn't tell you what exactly the problem, because if I'm hitting a slow database calls, for example, RDS or even serverless RDS, let's say, I don't really know for sure what kind of query was that, which user got impacted, and so on. So that's exactly where logging comes in place. Logging helps us to really dig into the problem and start to troubleshoot what's going on. Luckily, with Lambda functions, you don't need to set up loggings. It already goes to CloudWatch logs, and then you can set it up to Elastic or any other service provider that you want. So that gives you the second pillar. Now, in observability, if you're doing these two things, it's okay, but it's not it's like good enough. If you're having a super distributed application, this becomes complex, because then let's say you're having metrics of calling to the database, but you're having 10 Lambda functions, different ones that are calling to the same database that you're using. And it's not only the Lambda function itself, you're having multiple Lambda functions, complex flows. So that's exactly where tracing or distributed tracing comes in handy. It helps you really to correlate a request as it moves from one service to another, or from one function to another. And this can be, super distributed. Some examples from our customers: an API gateway calls a Lambda function, putting it into an SNS, which triggers several Lambda functions in some sort of a fan-out pattern, and each one is doing some computation and doing some other things. And then when something breaks in the somewhere along this path, you really want to know the full path that led to it. So tracing really comes in handy, and all three together, that's what brings real observability, being able to both monitor and troubleshoot these kind of applications.
Right. So if I'm a serverless developer and I've got an existing project, but I've not really looked at dealing with observability thus far, how do I go about learning what to do? How complicated is it to retrofit it into an existing project?
That's a good question. The first thing I would recommend is first to understand what's the scale of your project. If it's a side project, you would definitely don't want to invest now in, evaluating tools or learning too much and so on. The out-of-the-box things that comes with AWS are more than enough. CloudWatch provides both the logs and the metrics and alarms, and you got X-ray and you got service lens. You got the full ecosystem that should provide you with, getting started or get go when you're doing Lambda. Now, when your application is not, a single or couple Lambda functions and not just a single DynamoDB, getting, tens of resources, hundreds of resources, composed with Lambda functions, queues, like message queues, topics, databases, event buses, and so on. This is where you need something a bit more complex. And I would start, first with learning a bit about tracing, just in a glimpse, understand how it works. How do you understand the correlation between services as this moves through async chain of calls? This can be easily done using Open Tracing, for example. If you'll get to Open Tracing, it's a CNCF project, cloud native. You can learn more about how tracing works. And then you have two options, and this is applicable for everyone. It's either do it yourself or pick a managed solution. And this is really, I would recommend if you're going to that path, like either of the paths, try to evaluate both. Try to understand what it means for you to develop and maintain your own tracing and logging and monitoring solution, because ultimately you don't want to see different logs in different groups and different traces in different places and different metrics, and configure for yourself everything from ground up. So understand exactly what would be the impact and cost for you or for your team. The other one is a managed solution where there are several. Epsagon is one amongst them. Here, it's much more simpler to get go. There's obviously the financial impact that can be done depending on, what's the use case. But I would say try to compare both to understand what would be the path choosing either one of them.
Yeah. Now, if I'm a startup and I've built my serverless application, when it then scales up, obviously the serverless side is really handled by people like AWS, but what happens in the observability space? What's different that you have to think about when you have an MVP that suddenly takes off?
Yeah, so I think that people underestimate the ease of scaling with serverless projects. I mean, you're having a single function, couple functions. Next week, you're having 10 functions. A month afterwards, each team member has his own environment. You're ending up with, 4 stages multiplied by the amount of, engineers you have. All of a sudden, you have 100 functions, and you don't really understand what's going on. So keeping the kind of manual approach that you build everything for yourself wouldn't scale as you did on the first days of serverless. So I wouldn't say that it's mandatory to pick a solution at the first day, but before moving to production or before moving to a meaningful part like MVP or when customer approach your first time application, understand what would be the impact. And try to evaluate these kind of tools, because that's the point where you can't look back anymore. Once it's in production, people are starting to use your product. You need to have a better understanding. Troubleshooting will take much longer. Maintaining the monitoring will take much longer. So you need it, at least a couple days before you're launching something or you get a real traffic into your application.
Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of customers now really starting to embrace event-driven architectures using services like EventBridge. How does this change your approach to observability?
So I think EventBridge, and in general, the main difference that was being changed in event-driven architectures is that it's turned from synchronous kind of event patterns to asynchronous kind of event patterns, which means that, for example, if you, James, going to Amazon to purchase some item, you don't want to wait for the whole process of, making sure that the item is in stock and whether your shipping address is okay and, what would be the estimated time and the confirmation and the charging and so on. You want to buy something and get a confirmation as soon as possible. And in the background, these processes will start to run. So it means that, you get an API, it gets, hey, I want to buy something. I'm James. I want to buy a new Alexa Echo Dot, for example. I'm going to immediately publish a message that says, James Beswick, want to buy 2 Echo Dots. This is the shipping address, and each service will gonna handle this kind of item and what it needs to do, and you'll get an immediate response that your order is in process. You'll get a confirmation. You'll get everything that you need. Yeah. So being able to break down applications into not only event-driven but async kind of event-driven applications. This is the magic that both giving us better applications, but making them one step more complex to understand.
Yeah. Now, you've been really active in the community. You've given lots of talks and you've organized lots of events, and you've been on Twitch sessions and done so many different things. What have you learned from all the different mediums that you've been on by talking to developers?
That's a hard question, but that's a good one. I think that, I might say this for maybe 6 months or 12 months ago, that there is a lot of knowledge and people are sometimes avoiding it and just jumping to water without really getting some experience or getting some knowledge. And, they're constantly experiencing the same problems of scaling this kind of applications because, as I mentioned, getting started with serverless, it's super simple. And all of a sudden you're finding yourself like in a high scale already in production, but not really ready and not really experienced. So I think that the best tip that I would give to newcomers or even ones that just started is to learn from others' experience. There are at least couple dozens of AWS serverless heroes like me that constantly speak about serverless and their experience and their use cases and what they learned from. So spend 10% of your time to learn about serverless and the other 90% to implement and get some more like hands-on experience. That would be my best recommendation and best approach to get started.
So what are some of the most common questions that you get asked?
So question number one, and this is also regarding our product, some people come and say, hey, Ran, what would be the best memory selection for my Lambda function? So for example, 512 or 1 gigabyte and so on. And I tell them very honestly that it really depends on your function. It really depends what it does, what resources it uses, what kind of function is it. Is it more memory-based or CPU-based? Because, I would say that 12 months ago, people didn't really got the awareness of understanding that choosing a memory also impacts the performance and cost. Right. Today, most of the people understand it, but then it's like, what would be my magic number? What should I pick? So there's not a magic number. I would recommend starting with not lower numbers. Most of the people that I see are starting with 128, which gives not the best performance, especially if you're using HTTPS connections, which require some sort of a TLS ciphering and communications. It's really degrading the performance for such scenarios. And if you're uncertain if you're using HTTPS connections, you are. If you're using AWS SDK, you are. If you're calling some HTTP API, you're probably doing it via secured connection. Yeah. So doing it will drastically improve. I would say start with at least 512, if not, closer to the 1 gigabyte. And also benchmark your Lambda function over time. Try to play with these parameters over, couple days to understand what would be the best case scenario for you, because there is no magic number. You can toggle it up to 3 gigabytes and linearly get more and more improvement over your function. And that would start to depend on what you prefer, better performance or, lower cost or, whichever your preference is.
Yeah. And so in all of your free time as a CEO or CTO and a co-founder, do you have any side projects that you've been working on that you're super excited about at the moment?
Actually, yes. My super exciting times as a CTO is when I'm actually writing code, and code is best at open source. So I'm constantly loving to put some open source tools and utilities for serverless users. So there are bunch of them, but the most interesting one, and actually ones that really relate to the topic that we just discussed. So one of them is the Lambda performance benchmark that you'll be able to share the links afterwards. It allows you to take one of your Lambda functions and test it against a set of memory configuration. So you'll see exactly plotted on a chart what would be the best configuration for you. Yep. The second one is just cost calculator. I know that it's really hard to predict what would be the cost of my Lambda function. So I put up a nice tool for, just having an easier prediction to what's actually going on.
Yeah, great. I'll share those links with everybody after this. So thanks so much, Ram, for taking a few minutes to join us today. It's really insightful talking to you. To everyone who's been watching, you can catch previous episodes of this on our new AWS Serverless YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and type in AWS Serverless, you'll see that we've got a new channel, and we've got playlists for this show and for happy little APIs and sessions with Sam and all the other content we've been producing. So my name's James Bezic. I'm a DA. I'm one of the DA team, which includes Chris, Rob, Eric, Mohib, Ben, and Julian, and it's our job to answer your questions, make it easier to use serverless products. So definitely contact us if you have any questions at all about Lambda or anything in the AWS ecosystem. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll see you all again soon.